Welcome to the Empowered Mind, Empowered Health podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let's spiral up. Today we have Dr. Alexander Tournier. Dr. Tournier has a first-class honors degree in physics from the Imperial College and a master's in advanced study in theoretical physics from Cambridge University. Dr. Tournier wrote his Ph.D. on the biophysics of water, the interface with biological molecules, at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. Dr. Tournier also trained as a homeopath at the Center for Homeopathic Education in London and is a registered homeopath. Welcome, Dr. Tournier. Dr. Tournier, you founded the Homeopathy Research Institute in 2007 and now are a part of the research team at the Institute for Complementary Medicine at the University of Bern, Switzerland. How did a physicist become so interested in homeopathy? And the most beautiful part, decided to pursue research in this field?
Wow, really good question, Jane. Thank you for having me on the show. So let me try and answer that question, because it's a good one. I mean, so what happened to me is a very personal story, very personal set of circumstances where, as I was finishing my master's or part 3 in maths and physics in Cambridge, I started I felt quite ill. I had, so-called chronic fatigue. Nobody really knew about it at the time, and the doctors just kind of put a few tests and nothing came through. And they kind of sent me home saying, "Well, there's nothing much we can do." So I started going around the different alternative practitioners to just find something that would help, because I was really fatigued. And I tried many different types of complementary medicines, and homeopathy was just one of them, and it was not very impressive. I mean, I went to see a homeopath in Bristol, and she had a big books and just listened to me for a bit, and then give me 3 little pills in a little plastic bag and told me, take when needed. And I went home and thinking, wow, this is not very impressive. And I thought, okay, well, this is not, I don't know when required is, so kind of forgot about it. And then one day I was very sick, so I thought, okay, well, I remembered it. And I took them, and I took the remedy, thinking, let's just try it. And then on that occasion, it just did something that I just went to sleep for like 10 minutes and then had a normal day, which where at that point I was like kind of getting ready for kind of sleeping for 3 days more like. So this was an unexpected massive effect that got me really thinking, what happened. And as a scientist, I was well aware that there was nothing in this pill. So I was like very, very curious about it. On the other hand, being brought up in France, where homeopathy is very common, I had this kind of background of acceptance, I guess, for homeopathy. My grandmother used it. Many people in France use it, and oscillocynum for flu is a big hit in France all over the winter. So these are the kind of the background I grew up with, and so I was, at the same time open to homeopathy, and at the same time, from a physics point of view, very, very aware that there was nothing. So like nothing in terms of physics and chemistry there that I could understand. So it got me started. It got me really curious. And I started to look into the science of homeopathy.
So,
and
yeah. Just your physical symptoms were that extreme exhaustion.
Extreme exhaustion, yeah.
You would often be really tired for a few days, and
yeah, I could sleep like up to 19 hours a day. So get up, shower, go back to sleep.
Right. So after taking the remedy, you fell asleep for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then felt quite a bit better afterwards.
yeah, then I had what I would call a normal day. That is, I didn't feel sleepy for a number of days after that,
Yeah.
and it repeated itself. That is, I took the remedy again, I think like 3-4 weeks later, and again I felt substantially better. So it was not like the cure all, and I, it took me a number of years to get back on my feet, but the effect was enough for me to really like feel okay. I don't think it could be placebo because I was not impressed with the homeopath. I was not impressed by the homeopathy. I had other complementary medicines which are more impressive, such as acupuncture, where you get needles. Like, talk about placebo, I mean, like, it's massive. So I was not like, and I knew there was nothing in it. So from that perspective, I was not like the prime subject for placebo. And yet it did something that I really couldn't understand. So that got me really, curious. That was the beginning for me. Yeah.
So skeptic with acceptance turned very curious because you're.
Well, I was neutral. I had no preconception at the beginning. I'm not, as a physicist, I did a lot of kind of theoretical physics and in philosophy of physics and science. And at some point you realize that we don't know everything, and it's okay. And it's quite fun. It's kind of what science is about. It's about, going and understanding things that you don't previously understand. So I don't really, I don't like the whole idea of like we've found out everything today, like the modern science has. Each time in the history of science where we have thought that we have discovered everything, we've just fallen our nose, and very badly. So I'm just more like, if you study history of science, you'll see that it's not a good idea to think that you know everything, because it's always been wrong. So
Yeah, so you're very open-minded.
Yeah, no, I think it's just pragmatic with the history of science. When don't start thinking that you know everything, because it's just not a good premise.
Right. So what happened next?
So next, so it took me like 2 years to recover sufficiently. I then decided, okay, I wanted to do a PhD. So I had to give up a PhD at that point. I was in Bristol doing starting a PhD in quantum physics of living matter, which I had to drop because I was just too sick. And then I said, okay, I need to do something that's more like towards biology and more towards water. So I went and did my PhD in Germany in the end, in Heidelberg, on the biophysics of water around proteins. And that was a very good, background, big preparation for doing science at a good level. So that's what I did. I was in Heidelberg, and I did my PhD. I then ended up doing my postdoc in London at Cancer Research UK, while also studying homeopathy at the weekends at the Center for Homeopathic Educations, for those who know that. And so that was really, really good. I had kind of the two happening. And I remember one day, the director, Marcus Fernandez, came to me and says, Alex, homeopathy is under attack. Could you help? And I'd already been thinking that homeopathy really needs more research to like, you need to understand homeopathy to be able to do proper research. And like, we really need to do proper research. So it was then the impetus for me to start the so-called Homeopathy Research Institute. And I got a lot of support from within the community, from Claire Elton, Peter Fisher at the time, who's clinician to His Majesty at the time, Liz Thompson. So many people came and supported the effort, and I found a wealthy donor who kind of helped us get things moving. And yeah, here we are more than 10 years later. and doing well. I mean, the institute is growing, and we have more and more presence online in terms of information we put out about homeopathy research and so on.
Yeah, you've got some amazing information. When did you become a homeopath and all of that?
So it took me it was a 4-year course. So I'm just trying to remember the date, roughly about 2010. I became, no, must have been a bit later. Sorry, 2000.
Doesn't matter. Years though to become a homeopath, and so important.
Yeah, about 2000.
To understand homeopathy in order to research it properly, like you said.
Yeah, for me it was fundamental that I had enough study of homeopathy from a practical level that I would not make some stupid mistakes in doing the research.
Yeah. So what did you find out? Water has some amazing properties.
Yeah, so that's kind of the heart of the matter. Water is a very complex matter for all its simplicity in terms of the chemical, H2O. It has like more than 13 or 14 phases of ice. It's an incredible solvent. In terms of it's, life would not be possible without water in terms of a solvent. It's one of the rare materials where the ice form is lighter than the liquid form. That's why we have icebergs and so on. It's really like a whole raft of really odd and interesting properties as a substance, as we know, and we still keep finding new interesting properties of water. So water in itself is a very interesting topic, and indeed we assume that it's not by chance that homeopathy is diluted in water, and water seems to be the substrate that kind of carries or keeps whatever we want to call it, information, or maybe an essence or something that is kept from the original substance. So water seems to be the vehicle here. Now, interestingly, like for all its complexity, water, it's been very hard to pinpoint exactly how it would register the homeopathic information. So we have hypotheses about this, and can go into them short, but we don't really have at this point like the smoking gun, so to speak. We don't have like a fully working theory which could kind of say, oh, this is how homeopathy works. Look, it's obvious. This is how it works. We're more like kind of still looking at different options and trying to build piece by piece the building blocks of an understanding of how these things work. So maybe we can go into theories, but what I find very important to stress quite early on in this discussion is that whatever we think about how it works, that is the physical chemistry, the water, all that kind of exciting research, in terms of clinical results, homeopathy has enough research to show that it works. So I'm in particular referring to the systematic review by Dr. Robert Matty, who did a review of individualized homeopathy. So that's, I don't need to tell you the type of homeopathy that's given by a normal homeopath, so individualized homeopathy. And when you do that against placebo in a controlled environment, a clinical trial, homeopathy comes through very clearly as working. It is statistically significant. And Robert Matty did a really nice also breakdown of all the statistics. and it passes through all the statistical tests with flying colors. Homeopathy, individualized homeopathy, works pretty much whichever way you look at the data. So this is a very strong vindication of homeopathy, the classical homeopathy, what we would call, the classic homeopathy from Panama. And so with that in mind, we just don't understand how it works. But we also see it in animals. So, there was this really, pivotal study, so-called Camelink study in Holland with Elizabeth Ellinger on piglets that really was, treating piglet diarrhea. And their results, again, are very, very solid, showing that homeopathy works. So there on animals, we have the famous experiments by Professor Endler from Austria on frogs. We have a whole raft of experiments out of the lab of Stefan Baumgartner on plants. So we have a lot of, and that's not mentioning that all, more than 20 replication on basophils, so these cell systems and others, which are pretty solid when it comes to showing an effect, and we just don't understand why. So we have to really separate there's an effect, which we don't understand, but it's uncontrovertible that there is an effect, from we don't understand it. So often the detractors of homeopathy will say, well, it's impossible, therefore there's nothing there, which is, not correct. We can establish that there's an effect without having to refer to any theory or understanding of how that effect is coming about. The establishment of how it works, what are the fundamental mechanisms that are at play, is a secondary step to first establishing that there is an effect. And I think we've clearly at the point where we can say, look, guys, there is an effect. The fact that we don't know how it works is actually a kind of interesting and kind of a driver in terms of science. Look, we don't understand. Let's do some science and understand. So as a scientist, that's really for me a driving force to push and say, look, it's an exciting problem. Let's figure it out. It could be something. It is probably something very unusual, because otherwise we would have found it by now. But it's exciting for that very purpose. And very clearly, it's pushing our boundaries of our understanding of medicine, of the body-mind interaction, of what it is to heal. So it's really asking some really interesting and fundamental questions, which I think, as a scientist, what really I find fascinating as a scientist. Yeah.
Very fascinating. And we should be endlessly curious as to how it happens. But you said something earlier, which I loved, and that it could be, a precursor to how life comes into form.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. It's an interesting note in terms of the physics, or of the biophysics of homeopathy. A very simple observation is that whatever the principles, so the physical, chemical, scientific principles that are at the heart or underpin how homeopathy works, predate the emergence of life. And so it's very probable that life itself emerged using, from a very early stage, those very principles of physics and chemistry that we see in homeopathy. And so then it's no big surprise that as evolved biology, as evolved living systems, we are then so sensitive also to homeopathy, because it's probable that in some way we still, so life, so to speak, still uses these fundamental principles, which just don't quite understand yet in the lab.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's get into some of the theories. Yeah, I listened to a short presentation of yours, and one of the arguments is is it 12C, that there's nothing left in water. so that it can't be the argument, nothing there. And yet.
Yeah, so the 12C argument. So 12C refers to Avogadro's number, and yeah, beyond that dilution, then you don't expect any even atom of the original substance. So how could it work? And I think this is a bit of a spurious thing, because it's very clear in homeopathy that it's not about a presence of the original material. I mean, if you think about simple substances such as salt, natmure, or sulfur, which are present everywhere, it's not like a trace amount of salt, natmure, that is going to explain the effect homeopaths see, regularly, 1M dilution of natmure. We know as homeopaths, you don't give that to a patient likely, because it might do something quite drastic. But yet it's just salt. Same for sulfur. So it's such a simple and omnipresent compound, yet we know that it has very significant effects, and sulfur being, the biggest remedy in the repertory. So we know these substances, although they're everywhere, have big effects. And so the idea that it would be the original substance that would be responsible for the effect, for me, has to be dropped very quickly, because it just doesn't explain the effects at all. And so we quickly have to move to an understanding that it's something more closer to an information, or some kind of essence of the information that is somehow being carried across from dilution to dilution. And that would explain why you can get rid of the substance and yet carry something of the substance in the form of some kind of information that then seems to be able to interact with other living systems. And that's so much more how we are thinking about it, in always looking for experiments that are at higher dilution, so that we can avoid the whole discussion of the material dose, which can be a bit of a complication, I think, to really understand homeopathy.
Right. And you show upon dilution that the information is carried through succussion.
Yeah, so we know that it's not a simple dilution. The experiments from Professor Betty on succussion have shown that if you don't succuss, then you don't have an effect. And everybody knows, homeopaths know that, but there's actually very few studies on that specific topic. But we know that without succussion, it's not homeopathy. It doesn't work. It's not a simple dilution. So there's this stepwise process, and any understanding of homeopathy will have to explain why succussions are so important in the process. They seem to be a vital ingredient in the whole process. Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you find happened in the experiments with succussion? The information.
The threshold effect. I remember how many, but like 40 or 60 succussions, and in that particular setup with an automatic machine, a succussion machine. And if they had less, then less succussions per dilution level, then eventually the signal died. But they have more, then the homeopathy would work. So it needs to be replicated. I know this is a very interesting experiment, but it really vindicates what homeopaths have been doing for 200 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and that somehow succussion breaks up the particles and then they reform.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm my personal pet theory is so-called quantum coherence domains, which has an ingredient where quantum coherence domains, the coherence domains are water structures. They're not actually structures in the conventional way because they're held up by a quantum effect. But these kind of, call them structured or domains, would tend to agglomerate together. They would tend to aggregate, and then the succussion would be a very essential part of breaking those aggregates and spreading them around the medium, and probably helping those aggregates spread and spread the information. And so in this way, if you have that type of mechanism, there could be other explanation of the same type, but that particular ingredient where you have something that aggregates and then is being separated out by succussion will have to be part of a convincing argument of how homeopathy works, because you need, succussion seems to bring that extra separation and mixing that enables the message to go from dilution to dilution. Yeah.
Right. So interesting. And then it reclumps, like you.
Yeah, and so interestingly, we have, this is kind of the homeopaths know, they say you have to wake up the remedy, you have to shake it, but it's the same idea really. And so it's kind of like gone into people, what homeopaths do without really thinking about it. Just shake the remedy before giving it. And I think it belongs to the same kind of idea but it just something people do without thinking about it now.
Yeah, because we often put it in water, succuss it, like shake it or hit it, and then give the remedy. And we know that it works better that way.
The whole what happens with increased dilutions and how that kind of seems to modify slightly the message from dilution to dilution. As we know, it seems to go more and more towards the more mental aspects that we don't understand. Yeah, so that's going to be very interesting also to understand one day.
Yeah, because one of the reasons I fell in love with homeopathy is because it takes the whole person into account, including the mind and the physical symptoms. And often after a remedy, not only does the physical get better, but the mental, emotional changes or becomes more balanced, or whatever we call it. But yeah, there's an aspect there that's pretty incredible. So how does this different from what we talk about in nanoscience, nanoparticles, that kind of thing?
So the nanoparticle theory is another big contender for explaining homeopathy, and has made a lot of noise in the community over the last few years. Actually, nearly 10 years. But I myself remain skeptical about the ability of the nanoparticles to explain the richness of what we see in homeopathy. Again, just if we come back to the example of Nat Muir salt, there's less salt coming out of a homeopathic dilution than you would have in a normal glass of water. So how is that going to explain the effects of Nat Muir, similar for sulfur, similar from whole range of very normal remedies that would find it themselves in just a normal glass of water. So how do I have a problem with the nanoparticles theory. Also, from a purely experimental aspect, we expect nanoparticles to be present in water, in dilutions, as they are ripped from the glass through the succussion effect, the so-called cavitation effect, that can rip elements from the glass. So we expect nanoparticles to be present in our samples, getting to conditions where the glass is sufficiently hard, the water is sufficiently pure, that you would not expect any more particles is actually quite hard, and it requires some really quite special experimental setup. So really, in general, you would expect nanoparticles. That being said, a line of research that is interesting is, what if the homeopathic, whatever it is, water structures interacted differently with different substances. So, for example, you might end up having more nanoparticles of copper in a copper homeopathic dilution, for example, because the information of copper there seems to interact with the actual copper. So the presence of the nanoparticles of copper would not be causative, they would be a consequence of the copper information kind of aggregating with normal copper, if that makes any sense. The information of copper in the water would help copper be present more than usual. So there's some indications of that type of effects from a number of researchers, and that's it's just not been quite understood. So we'll see what happens in the next few years on that topic.
Yeah, but you're more leaning toward the quantum coherence theory.
For me, that is one theory that has sufficient complexity and the right elements to potentially explain homeopathy. I'm not saying it's the theory, because we don't know. We just don't know. It could well be it's just a step in the right direction, but at least it has sufficient complexity to explain, all the different effects that we see in homeopathy, the complexity of the effects we see in homeopathy, the succussion effect, the information aspect, the interaction with electromagnetic fields, for example, which we haven't talked about yet, but there's a lot of indication that electromagnetic effects are at play here. Just lately, the research by Stephen Cartwright using silver-to-chromatic dyes. So these are special dyes, so they change color when they are in the presence of an electromagnetic field. And he showed quite convincingly that these dyes are sensitive to the presence of homeopathic remedy. And so that would be a strong indication that homeopathic remedies have some kind of electromagnetic component to them. And so, a theory would need to be to have that as an ingredient for me to be kind of incredible. Also, let's remember the experiments by Jacques Benveniste, who they used, and Montagnier, Nobel Prize winner Montagnier, where they kind of transferred information from one homeopathic compound through a blank sample. And they showed that if you have a blank sample and leave it overnight close to a homeopathic dilution, then that blank sample is not blank anymore. It has certain properties, this so-called field effect. And that has been reported by a number of researchers as well. And so that would not be compatible with something like a nanoparticle, but much more, it's kind of would more like a field effect, so a local field around the homeopathic dilution, which would go well with a lot of what homeopaths have noticed. That is, in practice, they might say to their patients to just wear the remedy on them. And that seems to work for a number of very sensitive patients. And there's no explanation for that in terms of nanoparticles, but it does work if you have some kind of electromagnetic interaction or electromagnetic information or something of that nature of complexity that is able to do that. So that's why currently I'm more in favor of the quantum coherence domains.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think you called it crosstalk.
Yeah, field effect or crosstalk. Yeah.
Yeah, how a remedy can transverse across glass into another subject or vial. And yeah, we've noticed as homeopaths that sometimes someone has a reaction before they physically take the remedy. And I've always wondered how that could happen.
Yeah, so that's the type of observation that is now just kind of, things that people, homeopaths, talk about, and there's no explanation. And I think the beauty of a theory like the quantum coherence domain is that potentially, or at least having the ingredient of electromagnetic information allows for that type of effect to be explained. Yeah.
Right. So you see it as an electromagnetic thing that's happening?
It seems to be a component. We don't know exactly if it's purely electromagnetic, but it's something of that nature would be compatible.
Right. Any other theories that are really interesting right now that you're?
I think these are the kind of two big ones for me right now. We know we could abstract from the quantum coherence domains to something more like water structures. It might not be something that, it could be something different of the nature of some kind of water structures, some kind of persistent water structures. So there's that's the more like line of thinking there. But I wanted to point out something else that is interesting, is that homeopathy seems to have effects on biological systems. So I talked about plants, talked about cells, human beings, animals, but yet in the lab with our kind of spectroscopy and physical instrumentation, it's been quite hard to pinpoint. And coming back to the idea that homeopathy predates life, it would then seem quite logical that biology is quite sensitive to homeopathy, and therefore biology might be the best kind of test system to explore homeopathy, because it has the level of sensitivity required to test to be sensitive to homeopathy. So to give it another example, if you have a radio signal, if you have the right radio, a receiver, then you receive the message loud and clear. But if you don't, it's just garbage. You just listen to noise, and it's just noise to you.
So this is why homeopathy is so individualized as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you're explaining. Just for the layman.
It's a very, very specific signal.
Yeah.
And so that's why maybe like things like plants and individual cells that are sensitive to very specific homeopathic messages could really help us find out more about how homeopathy works in terms of what we talked about is electromagnetic fields, crosstalk effect, and succussions. All that could be researched by using a system that is inherently sensitive, such as a plant or a cell or something. So that's the kind of current line of thinking for us, is to be able to find systems where we would be able to explore the physical properties about what happens if we zap the dilution with an electromagnetic signal. Does it destroy it? Does it not? If we heat it up, does it do something? If we don't do the succussions, what happens? What's the number of succussions that's required, and so on and so on. So we could, but for that we need systems that are sufficiently sensitive and reproducible. And it looks like we're getting there, that we are getting systems that are slowly getting sufficiently stable and reproducible that can start to ask those really fundamental questions about the nature of the phenomenon.
Yeah. And, you know, I just feel that we should be curious and put a lot of effort into discovering how it does work.
In terms of the placebo effect,
it does work.
Well, for me, I come back to my.
So let's run through just a few
systematic reviews of individualized.
Some of the arguments are that there's
those
nothing in it.
Is a systematic review against placebo, so clinical trials of homeopathy.
And another is that it's placebo. How do you counteract that?
And there it's very clearly not placebo. So there you go. And then if you want to argue that on animals it's somehow placebo, that on plants it's somehow placebo, I think I'm like, yeah, you know, if you want to think it's placebo, but it doesn't really work.
Yeah, like I've always said, how can a child or an animal know that you're even giving them homeopathy? So how could it be placebo when they have a positive reaction?
Yeah, that's the experience of the practitioner and or the mother, and it's very strong because you can see, and I think as a practitioner, a strong experience is when you give the wrong remedy and then nothing happens, and you just give the next one, and then suddenly something happens, and you're like, well, you know, it was the same procedure. You gave the same, you know, a similar pill each time, and yet the second one suddenly did something quite amazing. And that just doesn't quite seem to be compatible with the notion of placebo. But that's on the level of the individual experience of how homeopathy works. On the level of the scientific evidence, these trials against placebo are very compelling, and I really urge the people to look at the reviews by Robert Maddy in particular, that individualized homeopathy one, which for me really closes that argument, really.
Yeah. So where do people find a lot of this information? You have a website where they can go and read more and listen to you more.
Yeah, so I invite everybody to look at our website, hri-research.org. We have, I think, more than 200 pages now. The website is now in German and in French also. So, you know, basically in English, but then it's been translated into French and German. And we have a very popular section called the FAQs, and favorite answers and questions, where we really try and give kind of the best answers to the most common arguments that are laid across against homeopathy, and with the justifications in scientific references and so on. So this is a very popular section. And also we have a whole kind of reference section where we go, into, what's the current evidence in terms of clinical trials, in terms of systematic reviews and so on. And we do our best to keep all that up to date so that everybody can use it whenever required. So that we started this resource because we were being asked so often the same question. And then, okay, we need to come up with one final good answer for this question so we don't have to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And so it started like that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. If for homeopaths, but also for anyone else just interested or curious, does homeopathy work? It's really well done.
Yeah, thanks. And there's also a lot of YouTubes we've put, like the presentations from our conferences are available online. So if you want, you can watch some of kind of the famous researchers talk about their pet research, and so that's all for free as well.
Oh, great! And what's the YouTube channel called?
So if you look for HRI Homeopathy Research Institute as a channel on YouTube, you will find us.
Yeah, the Homeopathic Research Institute.
Yeah, homeopathy.
Homeopathy Research Institute. Very good. And before we go, you have some wonderful advice to people, just in general, if they have an idea, what should they do with that? I love
that idea. A general idea. I don't know. We are always looking for people to help us. So we are always we need help, and so indeed, if you have resources, or if you have time, and if you have like a scientific education you would like to help us, then please reach out to us on the website. There's a contact form. We're very easy to reach, and then it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, just to support you in any way. But also, Alex, you were talking about how if someone has a brilliant idea, they often don't act on it. Often if someone has a brilliant or an idea at all, they often don't act on it. And you're saying that if you have an idea, go forward and act on it. Do something about it.
Yeah, with homeopathy, we need people to be proactive, because we need people involved, especially in research. We need people involved in the communication aspect of homeopathy. That's very important. What I would also say is that as a community, we need to come together to orchestrate the efforts. That is, we haven't been always very good at coordinating our efforts as a community, and also we have not necessarily been very good at coordinating like research in homeopathy is not been a big priority for homeopaths, and quite understandably so, because until not so long ago there was no real need for research in homeopathy. The system of homeopathy works, and there was no particular reason why homeopaths should get involved in research, since it was just it works. These days, with the attacks and the skeptics, the need for research is a lot more acute, and that also then means that there's a big invitation, so to speak, to homeopaths to join in to the research efforts. For example, I'm also right now involved in the COVID effort to register all the COVID cases around the world. So there's the Clinical COVID Support Project, which is a registration platform of all COVID cases, so that we can learn more about what homeopaths are doing with their COVID cases. What are the common prescriptions? What are the common symptoms? And also, we want to ask some more fundamental questions about homeopathy, such as, can we understand better the law of individualization, or can we understand better how the repertory works, and so on. So these are research questions, and we invite homeopaths to really get involved in the research as much as they can, to kind of bring the whole home community forward.
Right. So it would be wonderful if anyone's interested to reach out to you and see how they can help. Since you are beautifully organized already. Thank you, Dr. Tournier. That was beautiful. So much great.
Thank you, Jayne. You can comment.
And to everyone out there, I encourage you, don't give away your power to anyone else. Just